remember going to conventions and seeing you at conventions through the 90s and into early 2000s. I'm like, I think that's the guy I saw in the lobby at Marvel. Like, it was this whole. Hey, thanks for joining me. Hope everyone had a great week and a great weekend. Are you doing the thing? Are you waging the war of creating whatever the thing is you set out to do? That seems to be the daily grind. I wake up every day with the same intention, make the most out of the time that I have for the things that I'm trying to achieve without somebody paying me to do it. And that's always a battle in its own right. So the rewrite for the book is going great. I've looked at the calendar and I have no idea how I'm going to complete it by early May, but I'm just going to keep my head down and blaze forward. Hopefully everything will work out in the end, but one can never tell. The hard part is that I had to accept and relinquish working on the book over the weekends for the last couple of weeks, in which I thought I would do, but there's just so many things that need to get done in the house and in life that I just don't have the bandwidth. It's really rough by the end of that weekend where I haven't worked on this huge task. And it kind of puts me in this weird zone, that the voice in the back of the head starts getting louder and louder. Then Monday comes and I sit down and I get to work and the voice kind of shuts up, but it's super unpleasant. I do not recommend it. I've been working hard on my practice of journaling, and something that I've brought into it is this little written mantra of read more, think more, and write more. And I think that could be modified and applied to nearly anybody's creative process, whatever the thing is. When I thought about my process, I internalized my thinking way more than I felt that I did. So in this, I externalize my thinking as much as possible. Notebooks and voice memos and anything that I can use to see my ideas and my thoughts outside of the actual work of writing. I've done it for years as a designer, but it was just this weird thing that I wasn't doing in my writing. This week's guest is Jamal Igle. There's a really great story that happens in the middle of this conversation. I think I've known of Jamal for, nearly 30 years. So it's not that he's new to my life, but we really hadn't had a relationship or a conversation before. But he's been close in my thoughts, let me say, for a long time. And I'm really happy having finally sat down and talked with him. He certainly thinks a lot about what he has to do to be successful in his own way. And it's pretty inspiring. So I hope you dig it as much as I did. This is me talking with Jamal Igle. Oh, look at that Aeron chair.
Very well. Two of them, actually. I'm sitting in the office version, and then I've actually had my wife. This was a present from my wife. I want to say 15 years ago. It's literally the best chair that I've ever owned in my entire life.
Yeah. They anytime I would get a job at like different design firms or whatever companies over the years, I would always gauge the quality of my tenure, in like what chair I had. Like you'd walk in, they'd be like, "Here you go," and then it's like a crappy chair.
Oh yeah,
this is not going to be good.
Yeah, especially if you're gonna be sitting on your butt, at a drafting table or a computer or whatever for 8, 9, 10, 12 hours every day. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to be comfortable. That's got to be like it's got to be a thing. And I did not realize that before. I didn't realize how important that was before.
Yeah, sure.
as along with a lot of other things that my wife introduced into my life at the time, like the concept of actually going on vacation.
Oh yeah. No, totally. Yeah, totally. Like I think I remember like what my wife, probably then girlfriend, was like, "Hey, we should go somewhere." I'm like, "What do you mean?" Like I didn't understand the concept of like, oh, like we can leave here, we can go somewhere.
Oh no, especially for me, because if it wasn't for like a convention, I really did not travel. I mean, certainly not for pleasure, and certainly not to go on a vacation somewhere. And my wife is French, and my wife is super French. Like,
yeah,
and vacation is very, very important. Like, she gets cranky if she doesn't get to go away for a while. So,
yeah, especially if you're not going anywhere in August.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Oh yeah. No, well, August we're actually back. We're actually going to France to visit the family for 3 weeks in the end of June through July. So, mostly because exactly that fact, my in-laws are like off to Switzerland, so it really doesn't like make any sense for us to be there any longer. And then my kid is going to be 15 at that point, and they want to try and do something like get like a job or do something this summer, and us dragging them off to visit their grandparents in Paris. Of all places.
I know how dreadful is that, right?
It's a thing, honestly, Alex, it's a thing with us because Rio is so blasé about that kind of thing. Like they've been traveling internationally since they were a toddler, so it's like it's nothing to them. It feels like it. Although they are excited because we were talking about taking like a little side trip to Amsterdam this time for a couple of days. So they seem to be like really into that
something
idea.
different,
something different, something different. But there's also the other part of it, which is they'll say because they were so young when they went to some of these places, they don't really remember. So they'll say, "I'd love to go to England one day. You've been to England, but I was 2." I was like, okay, fine. I get it. I get it. It's fair. I get that. I understand.
Absolutely.
I understand. So,
some of the greatest gifts people can give in life, especially to their children, is travel.
Oh yeah.
To be able to see anything that is outside of what your normal is going to just the value pays off so much down the road.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, this it's funny because I did not grow up with that sort of advantage. Like I didn't even leave the country really until I was like 21, and that was just in Canada.
Yeah, sure.
So
but still, it's different.
Still, it's different, but it's not, different. And my kid has been like traveled to France for like almost every summer for like the between like the ages of 4 and 11, and has been to England, went to Japan for 3 weeks, has had the opportunity to see things that I did not get to see until I was an adult. And, and they have, and even more opportunities coming up. I hope, we're planning for them to go to Costa Rica next year. It's a school trip thing, but again, it's an opportunity, for them to travel and to travel without us.
Here's some agency. grow, become independent.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's, I mean, going back to the concept of allowing yourself to be able to travel, to take a holiday, is a really interesting thing because it takes a lot of planning and preparation and hard work to be able to afford that. And and I'm trying to draw a metaphor here with the idea that we wrap a lot of that into our work experience. So people in the comic industry certainly wrap it into their work experience. Oh, I get to go to location X because I'm a guest at this convention.
Right. Exactly.
And, and it's like this kind of gaining of perspective in your life. And I'm going to make a hash of this, but it's also like going back to the chair.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about the chair in the sense that I recall probably spending every 6 months through the 90s trying to find the right comfortable drawing position. Is how high is my chair? How much angle is my
Right.
table?
Exactly.
Like it was this constant hunt. And I just think it's that hunt for balance in everything that we have in life. And some people are really good at just finding it right away. Some people are good at ignoring it and just grinding it out. And
I think most of us for the majority of our lives probably spend more time doing the latter than the former. Like really just kind of like accepting and kind of grinding through instead of like really. And it's not even really a time issue. I think it's more of an effort. They're putting in the extra effort to do things, putting in the extra effort to make changes in your life, to do things that enrich you as a person, because we're so programmed in a few different ways. We're either programmed as creatives, we are programmed to make what we do creatively as so much part of our day-to-day existence.
Yeah.
We are almost programmed from the time that we get into the arts, especially, that your identity is artist. Your identity is writer. Your identity is actor, dancer, whatever it is. That we forget that we can have an identity outside of that.
Yep.
And we're so locked into that idea. So being able to have, going back to the chair and going back to like the idea of going on vacation and all this other stuff, the idea of doing things for fun, doing things to better yourself, to enrich your soul, whatever that may be, whatever minor little thing, we have a tendency to push that aside in order to, because the effort to do it sometimes it's more than we want to exert.
Yeah.
On top of everything else, on top of like being, having to raise families and make a living, just sustain ourselves from day to day.
Yeah. What about if the effort is moot? What if you put in the effort and it doesn't work? So then it's like, I've just wasted this time.
Right. But I don't know if it's ever really a waste of time.
No, it's not. But the perception, the fear of like, so it's like, it ties in with, your idea about our self image. We go, okay, well, I'm an artist,
right,
or I'm a penciler, or let's be really like didactic.
Right,
hey,
right,
I'm
right.
a penciler.
Right.
Like you don't even see yourself as, hey, I could probably color that job, or whatever the other project is. You're like, no, I'm a penciler.
Right.
And you've kind of, but like to take the risk and say, all right, maybe I will be a colorist on a project or whatever the thing, even if it's not your own work.
Right.
You can take a risk, take a swing at it. You're going to gain something. But I think we do have a lot of fear about extending ourselves.
That's true.
In an area that's uncomfortable.
That's very, very true. And I think it really takes the kind of, come to Jesus moment with yourself in that regard as well, to be able to have a serious conversation with yourself and say, there are all these things that I either want to learn or I knew how to do at one point that I put aside to concentrate on this one thing because this was the one thing that at the time was making me money. And you really have to remove yourself from the situation in order to sort of come back around to the idea that you could do all of these other things as well. And that you could, what you don't already know, you're going to take the time to learn, and it's going to be a process. It's going to be a long process, but it is going to work itself out eventually. And I think that's true with everything. You know, there is a reason that I've decided to do this now, and there is a goal that I'm going for. You know, and it's important, and and I had to make it a priority along with everything.
Sure. Right. Add it to the list of priorities, right?
Exactly.
What you said something really interesting about this idea that, there's more to the things that you do, and being paraphrasing here, trusting in the process and all these type of things. Like, when do you feel, because I know, like, listen, we make tons of mistakes and that's how we learn, but when do you kind of feel that you looked at yourself with a little objectivity in your career and said, hey, I need to do this, even though it's not going to be fun, or this is gonna be a lot more work than I anticipated? But can you remember when that happened?
I can honestly say it was probably towards the end of my exclusive at DC.
Okay.
I had been there. I'd been working there, since the 90s off and on, and I had been working on contract there since 2007. So this would have been the tail end of 2010, the beginning of 2011. And I had left Supergirl at this point and was just sort of kind of floating around and doing little things here and there, trying to, I don't know. It was a weird period because I was getting very, very frustrated with the work, but not from a creative standpoint, but how I was sort of approaching things at that point in my life. And I was kind of miserable, actually. I was overweight. I wasn't sleeping well. I was constantly angry. I felt like I was spinning my wheels, and I wanted to do more. I wanted to write. I wanted to do covers. I wanted the opportunity to do things for creative services. I wanted to be more than I had been at that point, because I'd been primarily working as a penciler at DC for most of my career. And I saw other people at the company, my peers, getting opportunities that, I wish that I had been considered for.
Sure. Yeah.
And that makes it very, very, it made it very, very difficult for me. And because I was becoming so frustrated with my perceived position at DC, because there were people at the company who did not view me as, did not consider me to be a, like, quote unquote superstar talent.
Right. Yeah.
In spite of, at one point, Supergirl outselling both Superman and Action. Or, everything that I had done at that point to, frankly, save a few people's asses on occasion.
Sure.
But I was not perceived as being someone, the term workhorse was thrown around a lot.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I totally get it. And you can probably easily list a dozen people in your head
Yeah.
who cut that, oh, mark. Okay, these are the people who we grew up reading their comic
Hmm.
books. I totally get it, man. I mean, I totally understand that place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to write. I pitched things but I always pitched things to series that I knew were on its last legs.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah.
To kind of like sneak in,
Yeah. You want to John Elway that
Yeah,
thing. Just get the ball up there.
exactly. So, and it nothing ever got approved, and I was just frustrated, and I, you know, my 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 assistant at the time, God love him. He's actually here at the house yesterday. We were talking, and he was like, "Man, you were so miserable back then. Like just 'cause, uh, when you see yourself as a, I see myself as a storyteller more than anything else."
Mm.
And when you have all these stories in your head, and I don't think I'm a better writer than anybody else. I don't think I'm a better artist than anybody else. I think that if I have a strength at all in comics, is that I am a damn good storyteller.
Right.
That, there are very few people who visualize panel to panel continuity the way that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably always been my greatest strength. But I think a lot of that also comes from, my background, from, having worked in advertising and having done marketing and having worked in television, done animation,
Yeah.
having had this like varied skill set, having done copywriting, having done like attempting to do screenwriting over the years. So, I just felt like I had reached a certain point at DC, and at the time, it wasn't my profile was not going to become any higher there. And
Right.
I think deep down, that's when I knew like my time, at least emotionally, was coming to an end. And that's when I made the decision that I really need to pick up those things that I had dropped in order to try to become the best penciler at DC Comics, which was
Right.
a lofty goal. And there are a lot of very talented people who can make that claim.
Yeah, and think it's the job. It's so tough because providing a value in getting a book a well-crafted book delivered
Mm-hmm.
on time is an amazing thing, and an editor will almost always, go, that's what I need.
Right.
They go, I need this. But they get pressures. They get sales
Mm-hmm.
pressures. They get all these external pressures. And not to mention, there's an onslaught of people saying, hey, I'm the next big thing for
Right.
you. So they're constantly having to kind of negotiate this space, in this regard. And it's really tough to not be the pretty young thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a hard place to recognize.
No, I got that, and I understand that, and I think part of my frustration at the time really wasn't like I wanted to be able to do cool things, and
So what about searching for satisfaction? So, like, here's the thing: we search for satisfaction in life often, and And I'm like thinking about what you're saying. I'm going, oh, wait a minute. This is the difference between sort of internal and external
Right.
satisfaction. The internal satisfaction is doing the thing that makes you feel good for the thing that you've
Mm-hmm.
done, while the external one is being known as the hottest penciler
Right. Right.
for the company.
Right.
Like there are two very different things. They don't have to be completely different, because you could do both. But the point being is that we sit around, we bust our butts for those 12-hour days trying to be that person, to be, someone says you're Art Adams, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like that
Right.
kind of like
Right.
recognition. And it's like, and it's really tough if that's the sort of this even unwritten goal in your mind.
True. It's very true. And I think the way that I have managed to get around that sort of idea in my head since that point, so because
Mm-hmm.
we're talking, a decade removed,
Mm-hmm.
is that I have one hard and fast rule when it comes to picking projects, which is I only pick things that I think are going to be fun, that are
Yeah.
weird and different, and are just going to be the fuel that just gets me going. And it has honestly served me well. Like
Yeah.
the last decade or so, I've just had fun. You know,
Mm-hmm.
some, and it's not has nothing to do with money, has nothing to do with position. I like the stuff that I'm working on.
Yeah.
I genuinely have fun. That's the most important thing. And because I'm having fun, I feel like I'm producing the best work that I've ever produced.
I think I think you're correct. Not just specifically you, but I think that mindset is the only way to do
Oh yeah.
it. I think it's like, like, I guess, like a career is so much like dating,
Mm-hmm.
that like the old move for comics was, go spend some time with
Right.
DC, then show a little leg with Marvel, and then go over there and then have DC go, hey, honey, I want you back, and then you do this whole kind of
Right. The
game.
back and forth dance
But
between the two.
right, and the projects are like dating. So like, because often the assigned projects you get from an editor, hey, we got this thing for you. That's a blind date.
Right.
You really have no idea what you're getting
Right.
into. You're like, oh, okay, I think I like that writer, or I never heard of this writer, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But you're like, I gotta work, I gotta eat.
Right.
So sure. But then it's like, hey, who is that over there? That person looks really interesting. Or I had a great time talking with that
Mm-hmm.
person. Maybe they'd like to go out to dinner with me.
Right.
And then you have like this relationship that develops, which is that project that is interesting and
Mm-hmm.
fun, and get your mind working at all different
Oh yeah.
levels.
No, absolutely. But I think, in terms of working for like a DC or Marvel or, Dark Horse, as I said, or Boom Studios, because they do more licensed properties. When you're doing things on that level, which is essentially brand management. I mean, that's a lot of
Yeah,
what it
totally.
is. It's brand management. So you are a link in the chain of a much larger tapestry and a much larger story. And even when you're, when you're dating, when you're dating and you get on a regular book, there's always that courtship period in
Mm-hmm.
the beginning of what you're still trying to figure out. At least I know for me, I'm still trying to figure out within the first couple of issues how I'm going to tell my version of that character's tale, which is different
Yeah.
than, working on something like The Wrong Earth or Dudley Datson or Black, or Molly Danger, where it's primarily me. Like I am the
Mm-hmm.
driver. I'm not picking up the baton from somebody else and trying to find my way through, the myriad of artists and writers who've come
Sure.
before me. It's
Yeah.
it's a completely different thing. So like when I was on Supergirl, it literally probably took me 2 issues to really figure out, all right, this is my version of Kara. This is the way that I want to depict this story. This is the way that I want to show these characters. And that, I think that's always true when you're coming on to a new title, especially of something that's long running. You're still, you're always trying to figure out what is your take on these long-standing brands. So, there's the courtship period. But, when you first get into the business, you're just dating around. You're on a book for like 1-2 issues, maybe a couple of pages here and there.
Totally.
You're like, you don't even, you might get a peck on the cheek, but
right.
you're not, holding hands in the back of the movie theater. It's it's a completely different animal. When you're kind of the mercenary aspect of being a freelancer at that point is more about like, I need to keep paying my bills. I don't care what they give me as long as they give me something. And then you get to a point where you've got, long-standing runs on things and you've been around for a while and you have stories that you want to tell. And you have to take those opportunities to tell those stories and be able to, have a long-standing relationship with your best girl or guy or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's, and I am really fortunate to get to have these really rich conversations with creators. And it forces me to really stare back at all these things that I wasn't paying attention to. When I hear people talk about it, I'm like, oh yeah, why did I not recognize this? Why didn't I act? And it doesn't drive my day, but it allows me to kind of face it, because I think it's the difference between accepting what others want from you versus what you want for yourself.
Right. Absolutely. Well, because especially when you first get into the business, because a lot of times an editor or a publisher wants to be able to mold a young artist into what they need them to be, as opposed to exploiting, for lack of a better word, who the strengths of the artists that they are hiring. They try to change them into what they need them to be at the time. And, a young artist isn't always, cognizant of that idea. I think it's a little bit different now. I know, looking at my own students' work and seeing in some cases how fully formed they already are, like 18, 19 years old, which is amazing to me. It really is. Because I don't know if I necessarily understood what it was that I was completely looking for in my own work at that age. I was, kind of still emulating the people that I grew up with.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think there's a greater, I call it, it's feedback loop. This feedback loop is it's so much larger, faster, and stronger than it was when we were, growing up, in the 80s. Our ability to, keep tabs on specific artists and series was not nearly as prevalent as it is now.
My up until probably like 87, like the most I had maybe seen outside of like the newsstand was occasionally stumbling across a copy of the Comic Buyer's Guide.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, like the Bible. What is this thing? What does VF mean? What is G? Yeah. it was like, yeah, I mean, it was really like finding something out of
Oh
Indiana
yeah.
Jones because you could really,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
no, it was super
No,
exciting.
absolutely.
Where did you
I grew
grow
up in
up?
Brooklyn. I grew up in
Okay.
Flatbush. I still live in Brooklyn. Um, I actually came back. I left and came back, but
Okay.
ended up back in Brooklyn. Actually, not that far from where I grew up. Uh, but yeah, so I grew up in Brooklyn. I went to school here. I went to the High School of Art and Design, Art Students League,
Mm-hmm.
School of Visual Arts. Did the whole like New York, art, comic art, you know,
Yeah,
grand tour of schools.
sure. So you're a few years
Mm.
behind me, but like you've worked with people who went to school just a little bit after me. So like people like
Yeah,
Soto, you work with Chris, and so the guys like Kevin McCarthy and Brett Lewis and John Paul, like all those guys went to SVA when I went
right.
to SVA. So they were like a few years behind, one or
Mhm.
two, and it was just this kind of trail off. And so let's see if this pans out. I have a memory of meeting you
Okay,
I'm going to say it was 93,
okay.
94. And it, and it was in the lobby of Marvel
It's
Comics.
entirely possible. Was I wearing a black
Okay.
baseball cap and leather jacket?
Possibly. So so I was going to the office to go talk to my editor, drop off pages. Don't really remember the reason why I
Right.
was going. My buddy who I went to art school with was
Mhm.
with me. And I was like, "Hey, come on along," because I was encouraging him to kind of build relationships and hopefully he would be a
Right.
penciler, with for his dream. And so we're in the lobby and I'm talking to the receptionist and she calls back to Marie Javins. And so Kevin Summers comes out to get me in the
Mhm.
lobby and my buddy's coming with me. But meanwhile, my buddy had struck up a conversation with this young man sitting in a chair or on the
Right.
couch, just talking. And so Kevin's like, "Hey, come on." And I'm all right, cool. And I'm like, "Hey, Hunter." So go
Right.
walking off. Sorry, said his name.
Oh, I
Walking down
know
the
exactly
hallway,
who you're
and
talking about now.
I'm walking down the hallway, and Kevin goes, "I know your friend's coming today, but who's the other guy?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I turn around, and Hunter's got this young guy with him, just walking and talking. And I get to Marie's office, and I thinking, okay, well, this guy had somewhere to go too, so he'll go off and go do his thing. And then Marie goes, and then like he's standing there with this young guy, and Marie goes, um, uh, who? And I'm like, oh, okay, hold on. And I said, "Hey, Hunter, like, I don't," and I asked the guy, I'm like, "Who are you here?" And you're not you, but whoever it was said like, "Hey, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just here to see
Right.
somebody." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm here for an appointment like with my editor, so I can't actually like, you know." And he was like, "Oh, okay, like that." But I think really in my memory, my friend's like, "All right, cool," and he left with this young
Right.
guy. And I was like, "Oh," but I remember going to conventions and seeing you at conventions through the
Right.
'90s and into early 2000s. I'm like, I think that's the guy I saw in the lobby at Marvel. Like it was this whole. So that was the very sort of odd first time I may have
So
encountered you.
okay, so I remember that. Now that you remind me, I remember that. And here's what happened was I was actually waiting for Joey Cavalieri.
There you go.
So Hunter, who
Uh huh.
like, because I had actually met Hunter previously, so
Okay.
so when you guys walked in, I was like, oh, I might as well just go in and find Joey.
Makes complete
Once
sense to
he knows
me.
I'm here, I might as well go find
Sure. Oh my God, that's so fun. That is so funny. I love this. I'm not joking, Jamal. This has
him.
been 30
Oh,
years in my mind of I'm like, I think I met that guy. So there you go.
oh yeah.
I hope I wasn't too much of
No,
an
no, no.
asshole. That's all I have to say.
It wasn't. It wasn't that. And I will. This is not. This is something that, you know, when I say this to you, I'm sure you will. I'm sure that you will understand. So I am. So I am what they refer to as a high functioning autistic.
Yeah, okay. I'm with you.
So, and especially back then, I was not diagnosed as a high functioning autistic. So boundaries were very difficult for me to gauge in
Yeah.
situations. So, you know, I have a very distinct memory of one of the first Great Eastern conventions that I went to. And Dark Horse was set up there, and I was like, you know, young and looking for work. This was what, probably around the same time, like 1993. And it's at the Javits Center. And Randy Stradley was going to do portfolio reviews. And I ended up following Randy around until he was heading to the Dark Horse booth for like a good 10 minutes. And he's talking, you know, Randy's huge. I'm 5'10". Randy's like 6'4", 6'5", something like that.
He is
No,
not
he's
small.
not small.
Yeah.
And he turns around, he looks at me, it's like, I'll be there soon. And I was just like, oh, okay. But at the time, I didn't think of it that way. Like, it's like, oh, he's going to do his portfolio. I might as well just follow him until he gets to the move.
Sure. Like yeah. You had a task. You were just focused on the task. So, yeah, man, that is fantastic.
It's something that I had to come to realize later in life. It wasn't something like when I was diagnosed as a kid, they didn't call it autism, they called it hyperactive disorder.
Sure.
So I did not know that's what that was. And I did not, you know, and when I got the diagnosis about my autism a few years ago, it was like a light bulb moment. It's just like, oh, that explains a lot, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So
yeah, no, I mean it makes total sense, but I also it makes sense and I'm looking at it from your perspective, and you're like, I'm here for a purpose. I'm not because you know, if you know Soto, his secret, not his secret, but his he broke into Marvel with a friend on an evening, and it wasn't like a malicious thing. They just made their way into the building and were kind of like pinched, you know, but that was how he first, you know, got into Marvel. But, you know, so, I mean, you know, so yours is less, you know, B&E than his. Oh, yeah. So finding your voice, finding your thing, it's not an easy thing to do.
I think for me, honestly, there was a moment, you know, at DC where I found myself rewriting a series that I was working on. And as I'm rewriting and penciling and having to re-dialogue, you know, entire batches of pages, and getting very, very frustrated because I knew that my name was not going to be on this book as the writer.
Sure.
I was still getting paid, but it was one of those. I have these moments in my life where something happens and I go, oh crap, I forgot I could do that. and then I start picking it up again and I start working at it. The same thing with inking, the same thing with coloring my own work. It started as something that I did on the side, that I put to the side. And then, after I left DC and after I was doing work for IDW, I was doing work for Archie, I was, doing work for all these smaller publishers. I was, doing, my own book, Molly Danger. I was getting involved in all these other projects. I was doing, I was going back and doing advertising work. I was doing, D2C work for advertising. And, all of these things, there was always something that came up. There was always a job that came up where I knew that if I could outsource that part of the job, I could outsource this coloring gig, but I know somebody who could flat these pages for me quickly. Let me take a shot at coloring it myself.
Right.
Or, for example, like during the pandemic, I wrote 2 short stories for different anthologies, and I got other artists to work from the short stories. But for the first short story, the artists involved lettered it themselves. For the second short story, I did the letter. I went in, I pulled out all the old computer lettering books, fired up Illustrator, started looking at Nate Pecos's tutorials online, and lettered this 8-page story. I don't call myself a letterer, but at the same time, it gave me the impetus to start teaching myself how to use Illustrator properly, which is another tool that I now have in my box. And another perfect example, last year I did a book with National Public Radio, written by Alex Segura, called The Mysterious Microphase.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I decided. Now, keep in mind, I've had Clip Studio Paint sitting on my computer for years. Always swore I'm going to learn how to use this program. Never touched it. Partially because I still enjoy working on paper for the most part. But it was an opportunity. I took that as an opportunity to teach myself how to use Clip Studio Paint. And ended up drawing a 39-page comic book entirely digitally. So now I have that, tool in my arsenal as well. So it's always comes from a need and then a desire to want to learn.
Yeah, and it's that that adage that you hear when you're young, learn on somebody else's dime. It's the best way to do it, because okay, cool, you're gonna put the sweat equity in. You might as well do it and get paid to do it.
And it's also one of the things that I've always sworn to myself is I do not want to be the old guy left behind. I don't want to be one of the people that, as technology marches forward, is still sitting in his studio wondering why nobody's answering his calls, or at this point emails or tests or whatever.
Sure. Well, I mean, at this point, they're wondering why they're not getting the calls, but that's because someone's trying to email them, but they're not looking. And it's heartbreaking, man. We saw these people, and they're still out there, but you see these people, and it's like the Rolling Stones when you're a kid, and and there was this sort of like, well, they'll, you know, no one's gonna be a rock and roller at the age of 40, and then you're like, or 50, or
Yeah, but
60, or
that's the thing is
70.
as we creep up in age,
Yeah.
we go from being the angry young men to being the tired old men ourselves.
Right. The
The
angry old men.
men.
Yeah.
More tired than angry usually, but definitely, I'm
Yeah.
definitely there. But at the same time, you have to have a willingness to want to explore new things as well.
Sure.
Because I know plenty of people. My mother-in-law is a perfect example of this. My mother-in-law is 78 years old and runs an organization in France that teaches music to autistic students. My mother-in-law has the French Legion of Honor medal for this. She started this organization when she was like in her early 60s. Just from the ground up, created this entire system. And like she just got honored like just past week by the French government. Again, this is like her third medal from the French government. Like,
highly decorated. Highly
but
decorated.
But Francoise is one of the sharpest people that you will ever talk to. And she's not like one of these people who like ask her to do something on the computer. She's good. She's firing off emails, going to conferences, doing all this stuff, organizing all this stuff. There has to be a willingness to learn. There has to be a willingness to want to do things. I want to maintain that willingness in my life in general. Yeah.
Well, embracing discomfort is a big part of that, because you have to be uncomfortable to get comfortable. Like that's the only way there is. I mean, our ancestors were out in the cold weather, freezing, and then someone said, "Why don't we just go in the cave?" And then someone's like, "Hey, why don't we just keep that fire, that lightning bolt hitting the tree? Just keep that going?" But like, and a lot of people burn their hands in that process. But you end up getting to the point where we have to do this, and that is the creation process. The creation process is consciously saying, I'm going to be uncomfortable. This is going to be miserable at the beginning. And then eventually you'll be able to sort of master the environment to one degree or another, and then get some agency.
Even then, it's always work. I mean, I constantly will find myself sitting at the board, even after I lay a sequence out, and just be like, okay, you thought of this, idiot. How are you going to do it? Like, how are you going to make this happen? You can do this. Just how? Like, how are you going to make this work? Like,
well, and it's also those, you're talking about the tools in the toolbox. I much like you have had to have quite a wide range of, work endeavors to keep the lights on. And there's this big old toolbox full of stuff, but the work is so various that I don't use all those tools all the time. So I find myself sitting down on a project going, okay, I said I would do this, and I've done this kind of stuff before, but it's been years. And now I got to figure out how to do this thing again. And
there's always that, like, that initial, like, for me, there's always like the first hour of just like, okay, look, you know how to hold a nib. You've done this. You've been inking with a brush since you were 18 years old. You know how to do these things. Just because all you've been doing is penciling for the last like 6 weeks. Like, get it together, man. Get it together.
Well, there is no Command Z with that brush, so we have to.
Not. It's hysterical because I teach at the School of Visual Arts now, and
Nice.
Working with sophomore cartooning majors, and there I recognize like all of like the fried wiring in their brain when
Uh-huh.
I was in school. Like at that moment, like I had this one young lady who is, she's also taking, Nelson DeCastro's inking class at SVA.
Sure.
And like, I've seen like marked improvement in her inking work over the last year, but we're like sitting down and like trying to, explain like thick and thin, and like, being careful about hatching and not wanting to go too heavy on things. Yeah. But,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that's come out of that experience so far is that it's forced me to think about my own work and how I present my own work
Yeah.
as well, which is not somebody, I forgot who it was. It was somebody who was warning me that would be the case. That's like, yeah, you're going to start
Mm-hmm.
really thinking about how you work, because you need to be able to explain it to them. And yeah,
It's the process, right? Because you have these people with very
yeah.
large eyes sitting in a room looking at you as if you might have this answer to something that they
Right.
don't know,
Absolutely. And
even though they
well,
know everything. Yeah.
and occasionally having to talk them off the ledge. But
Yeah. Yeah. But that it's, I mean, that discovery of having to look at how you think your way through a problem and then to be able to convey that to another person is, I mean, there are things that I keep saying to people to do. Like I remember at school, they would say, hey, take
right,
painting classes. I don't want to paint. I want to draw comic books. And they were like, yeah, but you'll be a
you'll be a
better
better. Yes,
drawer if you paint
exactly.
more, and I go, okay, I need to do it. But, I talk to people who, artists, I'm like, hey,
Hmm.
try to write, try to write, try to write. And then if they're the people who've already done the writing part, I go, okay, great. Write
Oh
something
yeah,
for somebody else. Don't write it just for you. Write a script for someone else because, the artist method of writing typically is like
mm,
thumbnail, convert that
right.
into, page, script, but you can't do that for somebody else. You have to let them come up with the whole thing. So you need to give them that
Oh yeah.
script guideline.
The way I got around that for myself was actually, even for myself, I always write a full script,
Yeah.
and it also gives me the opportunity to yell at the writer who came up with it.
Yeah,
At the
sure.
end, it's just like, because I'll finish a script, and then I'll turn around like 6 weeks later when it's time to sit down and start laying it out. It's like, okay, why did I do this again? Like, why did where?
That
Yeah,
son of
exactly.
a
You
bitch.
mf'er. Like, really, just
Yeah. Oh no, writers, we're the
oh yeah.
horriblest people in the world. We're out to ruin everyone's day. Yeah. Was Molly Danger the first sort of project you took on as a
It
writer?
wasn't the first project that I took on as a writer, but it was the first project that I decided that I was going to shepherd completely myself.
Okay.
Because I had done some writing like back in the day, obviously, like everybody else. Um, I had to write scripts for samples, but I couldn't find scripts for samples. But then I was also like,
Hmm.
I was also taking playwriting, and I was also trying to be a screenwriter at one point, which was how I ended up in California for a bit, working at Sony. But I'd also, like I said earlier, like I had a copywriting background, working in advertising. I had a marketing background, so I was used to. It's not the same thing as writing prose, obviously, or writing a screenplay or writing a script. But when you have to come up with PR copy, you're trying to sell this product or this service to somebody, and you've got to
Hmm.
be goddamn convincing, right? in
Yeah.
the written form. So I've always found that those things really helped my writing along. But I always did like little bits of writing here and there. But Molly was the first time where I I literally said to myself, "You have all of these ideas." And keep in mind that Molly Danger, before I even began working on the book, had been in various forms for about a decade before
Mm-hmm.
that.
Sure.
And I had been writing little things here and there along the way. Did, a little bit of writing while I was at DC.
Yeah.
It was the first opportunity that I had to just take all of these different ideas that I had, not just about like superheroes and comics and wanting to do something in a bande dessinée format, but also I'm very, very fascinated by the idea of celebrity, and I'm fascinated by
Mm-hmm.
the cult of personality that we build up around celebrities. And I try
Sure.
to incorporate that idea into it as well. With Molly being sort of the centerpiece of this small upstate New York town that has built its entire industry and around
Mm-hmm.
her presence at this point, and is sort of forced to contend with the actions of her villains. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, the the whole idea sort of stems back to when I was a kid, and I used to do a little bit of acting when I was a kid, and looking at child stars, just everything is the whole
Yeah.
celebrity aspect. One of the things that I hope I get the chance to explore, because I will be bringing Molly back at some point, is having to deal with the ramifications of having an actual superhero in your town,
Sure.
beyond the 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 danger posed, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a financial toll, there's a governmental toll, there's
Yeah.
there's the I we kind of I kind of touched on it a little bit in the first book, the idea that her team Dart is basically a private army, given carte
Mm-hmm.
blanche
Yeah.
to operate within the city limits. So I want to explore that idea a little bit more, and exactly what that relationship with the city entails and why they put up with
Yeah.
her and her antics.
There's an interesting thing that you did in the book, which runs counter to the cult of personality danger that we have in celebrity, which is if people cease saying no to you, you lose your
Mm-hmm.
sense of boundaries. So when we see celebrities behaving poorly, in the public eye, it is because no one has said
Right.
no to these people. And it is an unfortunate thing because the end result causes these terrible demises of people who, we love, deeply, but no
Right.
one was there to say no. And you do have sort of a governance in her, set up to like, hey, no, you
Yes.
can't go out. No, you can't do this. Now, that's not to say that it is
No.
100% effective. It isn't. But the idea is that somebody was cognizant enough in that respect, i.e. you being the writer, but somebody was cognizant enough in this world to say, we just can't just let her have
Mm-hmm.
everything she wants because she'll just
Yes,
kill
exactly.
everything eventually, which is end result of
Oh no,
Homelander. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. That really came from the the fact that even within the story, I mean, Molly is still emotionally a child, even
Mm-hmm.
with all of her experience. And I know from my own kid that my kid tends to lie about dumb things that they don't need to lie about. And,
Right.
that's just, it's a defense mechanism with kids.
Yeah.
They don't want to get in trouble. So they'll occasionally just blurt something out, and it's dumb, and you catch them. But I wanted to set up that idea between Molly and Holder, where there's this sort of Holder has sort of become this reluctant mother figure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a position that she wants to be in. It's not a position that she ever expected herself to be in. Again, that's something else that I want to be able to flesh out at some point, and I think
Sure.
I will definitely get the chance to. It's a dynamic, and it's an interesting dynamic because then you introduce Austin Briggs,
Mm-hmm.
whose entire reason for being at Dart is completely selfish and completely self-serving.
Mm-hmm.
Not malicious, but he's the fun uncle.
Sure.
It,
Who doesn't clean up after
exactly,
everything's been done? Yeah.
exactly. So Molly knows how to manipulate fun uncle in a way that she can't
Mm-hmm.
manipulate mom. And, so
Yep.
there's that dynamic as well. And, it was, it was important to me. And I think, having had the opportunities that I've had creatively to work with the people that I've worked with, I've worked with, Sterling Gates. I've worked with Grant Morrison. I've worked with Mark Wade. I've worked with Greg Brucka. I've worked with, Alex Simmons. I've worked with some of the best writers possible. And I have learned so much from all of them about not just how to craft a story, but how to tell an emotionally evocative story. And being able to pull that emotional idea, which is something that kids see from one angle and adults see from another angle. Like, kids see the
Mm-hmm.
adults sort of, being mean to Molly and not letting her have friends. Adults going,
Right.
"Oh, I get it. It's actually dangerous. This is actually a dangerous situation that we're dealing with."
Well, the beautiful thing, and we see it time and time again, certainly in comics, is this playing with archetypes and tropes, and how do you reinterpolate this scenario? So we have
Right,
the
right.
Homelander version, we've got the Hellboy version. Hellboy is the same sort of scenario. We've got a very powerful otherworldly character who grows up in the
A
care
very
of a
strong
person in
parent
an
figure. Yes,
organization.
absolutely.
Right, but a very different kind of approach. While maybe on sort of like, if you were checking boxes, you're like, well, these things are it's the same story, right? And you're like, it's not. Like, you can take this thing and you can mold it in a way that is going to give the reader a completely different experience and an absolutely,
Oh yeah,
unique
absolutely. I think
payoff.
if you wanted to make the comparison between those three characters, for example. So in
Mm-hmm.
Hellboy, Hellboy is sort of accepted, this is who I am. I can't really change it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm never gonna be human. It's just not possible. I'm never going to be normal. I'm never not going to be a giant demon. So I might as
Mm-hmm.
well just kind of run with it. And I think that's one of the things that really makes, you know, Hellboy work as a character is just there's that more of a blue collar aspect to Hellboy that's always been written into the character. Not like excessive, you know, it's not like Wolverine excessive where he's like, you know, drinking and sleeping around and, you know, all of that stuff, or super
Mm-hmm.
violent, you know. Whereas Homelander is that cult of personality that, you know, id run wild, you know, and people trying to rein him in after the
Mm-hmm.
fact. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, the thing about Hellboy is that he is aware that he has a
Mhm.
role and a significance that is not
Right.
yet completely revealed
No, absolutely.
to anyone. So it isn't this sort of like, hey, it's like, hey, one day you're going to be really important. So we need you to stick around, like, and if you're raised well, you're going to raise a good child who's going to
Right.
stand up at the time that they're there. Nobody said to Homelander, hey, you're going to do great things. Homelander was
Yeah.
raised by wolves in a situation where people are trying to benefit from his existence. And those are the lessons he learned, and the result is
Well, I think
not
the
so
the
pretty.
thing that binds, you know, our three characters is there's an underlying layer of loneliness that runs through them
Mm.
as a thread, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where there's definitely a similarity. You know, my when I describe Molly to people, I say she's the most popular girl in the world, but she's also the loneliest. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and her
Yeah.
loneliness comes from the fact that she has watched everyone around her grow old and die, and she hasn't aged. She hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she doesn't mature. She's never going to fall in love. She's never going to get married. You know, she's essentially
Right.
stuck as this 10-year-old girl. So it's sort of the worst aspect of being Peter Pan. There are no Lost Boys around him to keep around Molly. Yeah, there's
Sure.
no
No
Neverland. There's
Neverland.
no Lost Boys. She lives in a museum. She's a walking museum piece to some people. She's an oddity.
Mm-hmm.
She's a cash cow to
Yeah.
others. And then to other people, she's just
Right.
a danger. She's our
Right.
hero. Yes,
Or a
exactly.
hero or whatever. Like, yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's the best part when you get to come up with these characters, and you can really kind of put them in, scenarios and environments that challenge whatever
Mhm.
their sense of self is, because that's when you get to
Absolutely.
really see who they
Absolutely.
are, as the writer. So yeah, I think it's great. The beautiful thing is that what you're doing is sort of going back to that whole old school Marvel DC thing where you had to play those
Mhm.
two companies kind of back and forth to try to sort of, you know, further your career, not just in a dollar sense, but just a sort of
Right.
a value sense. And I think now it's a matter of like you need to create your own thing, and you need to work for other companies on their projects. So because you might get a royalty check for doing a comic book at Marvel or
Yeah.
DC, you might. Um,
Yeah.
that's it.
But
You
that's the
don't
only
own
longevity
anything.
that you have in this business is, creation, like
Yeah.
putting your own characters out there. And,
Yep.
you know, something may happen with them. Something may never happen with them. I mean, it's a crapshoot.
Sure.
But at the same time, I cannot at this stage in my life solely be a shark swimming in other people's waters, to use a very
Mm-hmm.
bad metaphor. But you're a shark. You stop swimming, you sink, you drown. Um,
Yep.
and like I was saying before, I everything that I have gotten to do, you know, especially like the last like 8 or 9 years between, working with Tom Pyre and working with Scott Snyder, work, working with Kwanzaa Sajifo on three very distinct but very cool projects, and having a very large part in shaping and molding them and making them, I hope, unique to some
Mm-hmm.
extent. I mean, it's hard to do. Like, they say that every story's been told at least 5 times. It's just
Right. Yeah.
how you tell the story that's important. So I'd like to think that you know I'm trying to put my own spin on things, not just visually, but as a storyteller, as a contributor to the the story, the ongoing narratives that we are creating for these particular characters, you know, and just
Mm-hmm.
rolling and just having fun, and just you know, that's ultimately the thing that that's the thing that I want on my tombstone is, he had fun. My wife says the thing that's going to end up on my tombstone is he put shorts on Supergirl. But
That
oh
just
yeah,
might be on your
absolutely.
Wikipedia page. um, you broke into the business and the last method, which was
Yeah,
draw samples, show samples to editors, whether
right,
that's mailing or physically showing to them. And you had the luxury of being in New York City, which as did I. So
right.
it made the frequency a lot easier.
And I kind of miss being able to do that. I mean, there was a time where going up to DC was my weekly pilgrimage. It was my excuse to like get out of the house, like,
Mm-hmm.
take a proper shower and
Right.
like, go and be visible and, and present and like hang out in the city a little bit.
I live 6 blocks. Like it was a six
Yeah, no,
block
I
walk to
used,
DC for me.
yeah, no, from here it was like a straight like 40-minute train ride, and pop in an audiobook or read a
Yeah.
comic or whatever, and take the train to Manhattan. But yeah, I kind of miss that. But I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were saying.
No, no, no. Listen, I like reminiscing. Um, you're helping mold and shape the minds and creative spirits of the next generation. How do you how do you frame it for them, because your experience is
Mhm.
doesn't exist anymore? Like it would be a rarity if somebody like could recreate that pathway of getting into the business, because
Right.
they just won't let you in the door anymore. So how do you look at that? How do you say to them, like, all right, here's what you need to do, or here, how do you do it? Or you let them sort of say, hey, here's what I want to do, and then you go, okay, well, let's
Well,
figure this
I
out.
honestly feel like they have an advantage in a in a way, because
Mm,
social media has made it much more possible for them to get in contact directly with editors. And just in terms of
mm-hmm,
sheer visibility, I look at somebody like Gabriel Piccolo, who basically put up a full illustration every day for an entire year on his Twitter page and gathered like hundreds of thousands of followers, and that got him attention from DC. And I think he's like working on
mm-hmm.
his like fourth or fifth Teen Titans like DC Zoom graphic novel right now. Like, yeah, there are
Cool.
opportunities. I tell them all the time there are opportunities. I mean, you have the ability to get to know some of these editors on a much more personal level as well because of
Mm-hmm.
it. And that doesn't discount like having, the opportunity to meet people face to face at like conventions, for example. Because I always say, yeah, if you can get out to a convention, go to a convention. There's still companies that do like
Yeah.
face to face portfolio reviews. But yeah, that, the platforms that they have, whether it's like Tumblr or Substack or Instagram or even Twitter or DeviantArt is still around. What's the other? ArtStation is the other one. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
still
that's still
around.
around. Yep.
So there are portfolio sites. It's not that expensive to have your own website, to host your own website. Ultimately, I mean, it's an expense, but it's not as expensive as it used to be. And a
Sure.
lot of it really is about visibility and creating a public presence for yourself. And that's the thing that I try to encourage my students to do, is that to just make yourself visible and give yourself create a platform for yourself publicly. Not be an a-hole about it, but definitely like, don't be me.
Right.
I'm I am angry and political, and I know, but I also know that that's like half the reason, like half of my Twitter followers follow me, is just to see me rant about politics.
Right. Yeah, the lens that they're viewing life through is through this social media lens by and large. And I would think it would be very hard to disconnect that personal experience of social media with a professional experience on social media, because typically they probably would have the personal experience many years before they would try to make it a professional platform. So yeah, I mean, I think, and I like hearing you say that they have a greater advantage, because I think that's really cool, in the sense that this is because listen, it is a business, and you got to be your own business person to run your own successful art person career. And so the platform is the thing, and it's not specifically like, hey, I've got 200,000 followers or 30,000 followers. I don't think that's it. I think you can have 200 followers, you could have 1,000 followers, and be really successful in the thing that you're doing, because it's really just trying to find an audience.
That the visibility aspect really helps as well, because it's not like it's not like the old days. I literally, like, back in the 90s, spent a good 6 months every week doing a new set of samples and then sending them out to as many editors as I could, just to pray, just to hope that either somebody would, call me, or at the very least, like, write me and tell me, if they weren't going to hire me, what it was that I was doing wrong, and if there was an opportunity to change it. And it did work eventually.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about, like, what we were talking about earlier when I first met you at Marvel. But my model was go in and talk to, I mean, let's be honest, assistant editor X. It wasn't editor X, it was assistant editor X. And I would go in, and then I would just be free range at that point. I'm inside, and I would just go from office to office, introducing myself. If I haven't already introduced myself, I would hand them copies of stuff. It was just this go through the whole floor every single time.
I could say this now because I think the statute of limitations was over. No, but I mean, this was after, like, I'd been working at DC for a while, and so around the holidays, I would come to the offices bearing booze. I brought,
there you go,
either wine or hard liquor, and I gave everybody,
so smart.
I went from office to office and gave everybody a choice. And I did this it was very effective. I did this for a few years. Actually, it's a really
I'm sure
funny story. Is that apparently Dan DiDio, when he was still at DC, had to say something to Liz Garland, who was an editor there at the time. And the first thing she did was she opened her desk drawer, pulled out a bottle of Absolute that I had given her for Christmas, cracked the bottle, and said, "Okay, what is it?"
I love that. I love it, dude. I love it.
So it's different, that's the old
Yeah.
school sort of like,
Yes.
that's the old school sort of, Glengarry Glen Ross kind of, like, hey, who
Hmm.
wants a set of steak knives, kind of thing, it's like I'm trying to make people
Yeah.
remember you, but again, going back to the availability of social media and the ability to create a presence for yourself, public presence for yourself. I think,
Hmm.
you know, I think of somebody like, Gail Simone, for example. Like, if it wasn't for
Sure.
her articles, like, she would not have gotten noticed. But I think part of the reason why she got noticed is because what she was writing wasn't just like poignant; it was funny too, and people paid attention to it. And she
Hmm.
had a presence on social media before she really got the opportunity to start writing professionally. So, there's, it's kind of the same thing. If you can carve a presence for yourself, you know, eh, whatever it is, like, be positive. You don't have to be like, you don't have to suck up to people.
Hmm.
I've never, I've honestly never found
Yeah.
that to
Right.
be an effective way of getting work. You just have to be yourself and
No.
and be honest about who you are and what you want to do, and why you're contacting this particular person. It's like, listen,
Hmm.
I don't want to beat around the bush. I am looking for work. Would you mind if I sent you a link to my webpage? Would you mind taking a look at some of my work? Because even if they don't have,
Hmm.
and I say this to my students all the time, even if they don't have work for you immediately, you know, you're putting that bug in their mind. You
Hmm.
um, One of the reasons why back in '99 I got hired to do New Warriors was because Greg Schiegel, who was an assistant editor of at Marvel at the time, and he was Bobby Chase's assistant editor, had held on to
Hmm.
a sample package of Nightwing pencils that I had drawn like
Mm.
maybe like a year or two before, and held on to
Sure.
them. And then when they were looking for a penciler for New
Hmm.
Warriors, he just pulled them out of the drawer. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, was I was in my studio, um, and the phone rang, and it was the editor for,
Mhm.
I guess it was ever this handling Deathstroke at the time, and they're like, "Hey," and they were like, "We'd love to talk to you about penciling the book." Now, this is a character in a book I
Right.
would love to have penciled regardless, and I had just finished some samples up, and I was talking to the editor. I'm like, "Oh, cool! I'm glad you like the Deathstroke samples I did." And the editor's like, "Oh, I haven't seen those. I'm looking at whatever it was, and it was from
Right.
at least a year before." And I was like,
Mhm.
I could be over in 15 minutes
Right.
because I lived only 6 blocks away. So I grabbed my book, ran out the door, and went over there and got a handshake
Nice.
deal to
Nice.
do the book. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know how that works now because it seems kind of hard to bookmark a specific
Right.
drawing in an Instagram
Oh
feed,
no,
but I'm sure people have figured it
they
out.
have definitely. There's a system for it, from what I've been told.
Going back to what we haven't really focused on, it is that
Mhm.
face-to-face contact that is really going to put you in rarefied company if you can make a contact online,
Right.
then be at a convention and say, "Oh, hey, blah blah blah, I'm so and so, and I really,
Right.
thank you for liking the things I put up there. It's been meant a ton to me, and I've got some new
Absolutely.
samples. I'd love to show you some work." And that's when they go,
Yeah.
"Hit me with this. Let me see."
Absolutely. Absolutely. You want to hire somebody who's going to be easy to work with. You know, and I mean, talent will lead you a long way, but you know
Sure.
we've all worked with just complete a-holes, and it doesn't matter how talented
Yeah.
they are. if they're just going to make the experience miserable for everybody, it's just not worth it.
I'm gonna I'm gonna give you a quick little story here. I was talking with an ad guy last week, and we were talking, and he's like, "Yeah, I was working in a place, and I had to lay off some people, and this guy came, a guy who was laying off was
Right.
just really angry about the whole thing, and he's like, what do you want? You want someone who you can get along with, or do you want someone who's talented?" And the guy just paused for a second. He goes, "Both. I want both."
Yeah.
So what's going on in the future for you? Let's do
Okay,
some
so
little
I'm
promo
finishing
here.
up the last issue, penciling the last issue of Deadly Datson Forever Machine, which is currently on Comixology and will be out from Dark Horse later this year. And it's me, Soto, Scott
Cool.
Snyder, Tom Napolitano, and just having a blast with that. And then Tom Pyre and I are doing a 2-issue Raw Earth story because it's the 5th anniversary of Ahoy Comics and the 5th anniversary of the Raw Earth. And I'm going to start working on that in like the next month or so. And I've already got the script, and it's funny. It's so funny. And just I'm doing covers and just doing my thing. And then the fall we'll see what happens. There's a couple of different things that are sort of like floating. Like it's either one or the other is going to happen first. So it's just trying to figure out what's going to happen first. So
aside from New York Comic Con, any shows you're planning this year?
Oh yeah, if you're New York local, I'm at the Big Apple Con this month. I'm doing Terrific Con in Connecticut in July. I'm doing Superman Celebration. I'm doing Heroes Con in Charlotte. Yeah, that's actually
awesome.
Okay. That's actually going to be my first time back at Heroes Con in probably like 6 years, like 6 or 7 years. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
Cool.
And then doing a couple of shows in the fall. I'm doing New York and Baltimore, and then Twin Cities Con in November. And then I think that's pretty much it.
That's a good number.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the rest of my time is taken up by work, school, and French classes. So and the family, obviously.
Well, listen. Yeah. Well, we'll move the family part to the front of that list, in editing. Yeah, that'd be perfect. That sounds great. Yeah, I'll definitely see you at Heroes.
Oh, cool.
Jamal, man, great. This was fantastic. I'm so glad that we were able to do this.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me, Alex. I really appreciate it, man. It was fun.
All right, my friend. I will talk to you soon. Thank you for joining me. All right, see you.
All right, man.